The aisle trembled with the sound of raised voices long before Elijah lifted his eyes from the page. He had flown enough to recognize normal in-flight tension, but the tone slicing through the cabin wasn't irritation or fatigue. It was something sharp, entitled, boiling. When he looked up, he saw the scene unfolding near the business class curtain. A heavy-set woman with a blonde bob, clothes rumpled from agitation, leaning forward aggressively toward the flight attendant who stood blocking the path with a single, steady hand. Passengers stiffened, some pausing mid-sip or mid-sentence, while others dared quiet glances over the tops of seats. The overhead lights cast a sterile glow that only made the confrontation look harsher. Lena's voice wavered between demand and accusation as she clutched a large brown handbag to her side. She looked ready to bulldoze through the divider, as if sheer will could upgrade her. The flight attendant held firm, uniform immaculate, expression steady despite the storm swelling inches from her face. Even from several rows back, Elijah could see the flush rising in Lena's cheeks, the way her lips tightened, the way she inhaled with the certainty of someone who believed rules bent around her. He had noticed her earlier, though he hadn't expected her to become the center of mid-air chaos. At the gate she had complained loudly about boarding groups, insisting hers should be moved up because standing in line was unacceptable for someone like her. She had pushed forward when the gate agent called Group 1, only retreating when she was reminded she was in Group 7. She had scoffed at that, muttering about how the airline clearly didn't appreciate loyal customers. Elijah wasn't surprised she ended up just a few rows in front of him in economy, huffing as she stuffed her bag into the overhead bin with unnecessary force. The moment she sat down, she had restarted her grievances. The seat was too small. The row was too narrow. The passengers nearby were too loud. She demanded a blanket before takeoff, then criticized the quality of the safety demonstration. He had tried to ignore her, burying his attention in his book, but the tension she carried was impossible to miss. She radiated dissatisfaction like heat from a stovetop. Hours later, when the turbulence finally eased, the cabin exhaled in collective relief. Lights brightened slightly as attendants prepared for service, carts rattling softly in the aisle. That was when Lena unbuckled with an air of certainty, swinging her handbag over her shoulder as though she were preparing for a triumphant entrance. She didn't glance at anyone. She simply rose and marched forward, chin lifted, footsteps confident. Elijah sensed the shift immediately. He closed his book, watching her reach the business class curtain with the determined vigor of someone convinced the universe owed her a correction. The flight attendant stationed there greeted her politely, asking where she was headed. Lena responded with a tone that suggested the question was insulting. She claimed she had been promised extra comfort seating, that someone at the gate told her she could settle into any open spot up front. The attendant checked the manifest, shook her head gently, and explained that business class was fully occupied and no such arrangement existed. Lena's lips curled. She accused the staff of ignoring her needs, of humiliating her by placing her in economy, of deliberately sabotaging her travel experience. She stepped forward as if testing the barrier, and the attendant lifted her hand in a firm, unmoving gesture of refusal. The dispute escalated fast. Lena's voice rose, bouncing off the cabin walls in sharp echoes. Passengers turned, one by one, heads popping above seats like nervous prairie dogs. Some exchanged glances laden with disbelief. Others, already sensing entertainment, held their phones discreetly. The tension thickened, humming like static before a storm. Elijah remained still, eyes narrowing carefully, noting each shift in tone, each attempt Lena made to shove her way through. Then she claimed she had a medical condition that demanded more space. The attendant asked what condition. Lena snapped that she didn't owe medical details to low-level staff. The attendant repeated her instruction. Return to your seat. Lena refused. She declared she would not be imprisoned in economy for the remainder of the flight. Passengers murmured. Someone whispered, "Here we go." Another sighed heavily. When the attendant reached for her radio, Lena jerked back as though offended by the very idea of enforcement. She spun toward the watching passengers, barking at them to stop staring. Someone in row 9 raised their phone slightly higher, and Lena locked onto them with feral outrage. She lunged toward the device, barking that recording was illegal. The startled passenger snapped the phone back, and the sudden jolt of movement pushed the atmosphere from uncomfortable to volatile. That was the moment Alejo rose. Not abruptly, not theatrically, just a measured, controlled movement of someone who knew volatility when he saw it and understood that silence could make it worse. He stepped into the aisle, voice calm, yet carrying enough weight to cut through the clamor. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you're escalating the situation. You need to step back." Lena whirled toward him, eyes blazing. "Mind your own business. You don't know anything about what's happening here." He didn't react to her hostility. His tone remained steady. "Everyone can see what's happening. You're making it worse for yourself." His words hit her like a slap, not because of volume, but because they were unvarnished truth. Her face contorted, fury flickering between him and the attendant blocking her path. She looked trapped between outrage and the creeping awareness that she was losing control of the narrative she believed she commanded. The attendant repeated her warning. "Return to your seat or the captain would intervene." Lena tossed her head back defiantly, declaring she wouldn't move until someone gave her the seat she deserved. Silence followed, sharp and expectant. Even the hum of the engines felt subdued, as though the entire plane held its breath. Then the attendant lifted the radio, pressing the button. "Captain, we need your presence in economy. Passenger interference." Lena's eyes widened. For the first time since she stood, uncertainty flickered across her face. And that was when Alejo knew things were about to shift, though whether for better or worse remained hanging in the thick, electric air of the cabin. Yet even as the attendant waited for the captain's response, Alejo sensed that the confrontation had only reached its first stage, and whatever happened next would determine the fate of everyone's fragile peace on board that day. Lena's glare shifted rapidly between the flight attendant, the watching passengers, and Alejo, as if searching for an angle that would restore her sense of dominance. The threat of the captain's involvement clearly rattled her, yet she clung to her indignation like a shield. The cabin felt increasingly smaller, every inch of space thick with tension, every sound sharpened by unease. Even the gentle clatter of service carts in the distance seemed to pause, as though the entire aircraft had entered a moment of suspended anticipation. Lena's voice returned in a shrill burst. "This is discrimination. I paid good money, and I deserve respect." A few passengers flinched at the pitch of her protest. The flight attendant maintained her composure, though her steady hand signaled preparedness for whatever might erupt next. It was clear she had faced unruly passengers before, but Lena was testing limits with unusual intensity. Her anger radiated in waves, loud enough to drown out the hum of the engines. She pointed her finger at the attendant in a stabbing motion, delivering a barrage of accusations without pause. Another attendant approached, drawn by the commotion. Lena pivoted, yelling about poor treatment, false promises, and hostile service. She claimed she was being targeted, insisting the airline had wronged her since boarding. The new attendant tried to speak, but Lena cut her off repeatedly, each interruption more forceful than the last. If she had hoped the additional staff presence would validate her demands, the opposite occurred. The attendants coordinated silently, their body language shifting into a unified, defensive front. A child nearby began crying softly, overwhelmed by the volume of Lena's outburst. Her mother whispered reassuring words, but the sound only seemed to fuel Lena's determination to dominate the cabin. She turned toward the crying child with an expression of irritation, muttering about children being disruptive. The mother shot her a warning look, but wisely chose not to escalate. The intensity was volatile enough without new sparks. Lena then tried to frame herself as the victim. She clutched her chest dramatically and declared she was being verbally attacked. Several passengers exchanged looks suggesting disbelief. One muttered, "She's unbelievable," just loud enough for others to hear. She spun around, shouting at them to stay out of it, insisting that her struggle was private. Yet her voice carried with such force that privacy was impossible. Seeing that the situation was spiraling further, Alejo stepped closer to the aisle, maintaining safe distance, while signaling he would not back down. His presence alone drew Lena's attention again. She scowled at him, her expression twisted with indignation. "You think you're some kind of hero," she spat, jabbing a finger in his direction. "You don't know anything about my situation." He answered evenly. "I know you're refusing lawful instructions from trained crew members. You're creating a safety issue." His tone remained calm but firm, calculated to deny her the emotional reaction she was trying to provoke. That calmness enraged her further. She swung her handbag onto her shoulder with dramatic effort, as though preparing to charge past the attendants. "You're all conspiring against me," she declared, sweeping her gaze across the nearest passengers. "This airline is corrupt. They're humiliating me in front of everyone." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the stress building beneath her bravado. It was clear that beneath her posture of authority lay a deep fear of losing control. The flight attendant tried once more. "Ma'am, sit down now. We cannot proceed with service while you are obstructing the aisle." Lena ignored the instruction and attempted to march forward again. The attendant stepped sideways, blocking her cleanly, but without aggression. The subtle movement reinforced the barrier Lena could not legally or physically pass. The rejection ignited her rage. She leaned closer, shouting accusations. But the attendant's unwavering presence made it clear that her intimidation had no effect. Passengers grew restless. Some whispered anxiously. Others watched with quiet fascination. A man near the window asked to switch seats with his partner because he disliked the confrontation. Another attempted to press his call button, but stopped, realizing the attendants were already fully occupied. The air inside the cabin felt charged, as though everyone sensed the situation nearing a breaking point. Lena then attempted a different tactic, lowering her voice enough to sound distressed. "I have a medical need," she insisted. "I can't sit in that cramped seat anymore." But when asked for specifics, she snapped that she didn't owe anyone explanations. It was transparent to everyone that she was reaching for any excuse that might work. When the attendants did not yield, she abruptly shifted back into fury. Her voice soared again. "You don't care about passengers' well-being. You're all useless." The words sliced through the aisle like thrown knives. Even seasoned travelers winced at her tone. One of the attendants calmly lifted her radio. "Captain, situation escalating. Passenger is non-compliant, becoming increasingly aggressive." Lena's eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare," she shouted. But her outrage faltered as the attendants maintained their positions. She turned sharply and addressed the passengers again. "Tell them I'm right. Someone speak up for me." No one responded. The silence was louder than any confrontation. That silence struck her harder than any reprimand. Her eyes darted from face to face, searching desperately for validation. Instead, she found a sea of disapproval and unease. A sinking expression formed on her face, though she tried to mask it with a scowl. Alejo, sensing the moment, spoke again. "Lena, you need to stop before this gets worse. Sit down now." She glared at him, as though he had betrayed some unspoken social agreement. "Who even are you?" she hissed. "You think you're smarter than everyone else." He didn't answer. His silence unnerved her more than any argument would have. Behind the curtain, movement signaled the captain preparing to respond. The attendants straightened slightly, readying themselves for the final escalation. Lena sensed it too, and for a flicker of a moment, uncertainty passed through her expression again. She clutched her handbag tighter, her knuckles whitening as she paced in a tiny, frustrated shift of weight. Passengers held their breaths. The curtain rustled faintly, not quite parting, but enough to suggest someone was approaching. Lena inhaled sharply, as though preparing to launch into another tirade, yet she hesitated. The hesitation was small but undeniable. For the first time since she stood, she seemed to comprehend the magnitude of what she had triggered. And in that taut, fragile pause, the cabin felt poised on the edge of a larger confrontation, one that would soon decide the ultimate outcome of her audacity and the crew's patience. The captain emerged from behind the curtain with the unhurried confidence of someone accustomed to stopping chaos with presence alone. His uniform was crisp, his expression firm but measured, and his gaze swept the tense aisle before settling on Lena, who froze as though the air around her had solidified. The murmurs through the cabin fell silent instantly. Even the engines seemed to dim beneath the weight of expectation. Lena's shoulders twitched, betraying her nerves despite the defiance she tried to maintain, but the captain's arrival stripped away the fragile power she had clung to. "Ma'am," the captain said, his voice carrying the calm authority of a judge delivering a final ruling, "I have been informed you attempted to enter a restricted section and refused repeated instructions from my crew." His tone was not loud, yet it commanded absolute attention. Lena opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand lightly, and the gesture alone silenced her. "You need to return to your assigned seat immediately." Lena sputtered, gripping her handbag like a life raft. "Sir, they're lying about what happened. They've treated me horribly since boarding. I was promised a seat up front. I have a medical need. They're humiliating me in front of everyone." The captain's eyes remained steady. "We have body camera footage, witness statements, and multiple passengers recording the incident. Your claims do not align with the evidence." A ripple of quiet satisfaction moved through the cabin. Lena looked around wildly, hoping to find at least one sympathetic face, but the passengers avoided her gaze. Some watched with restrained amusement. Others simply wanted peace restored. The captain stepped aside, allowing the lead flight attendant to gesture down the aisle. "Please follow me, Ms. Lena." The subtle emphasis on her name made her flinch. With every reluctant step she took, the humiliation deepened. The aisle that she had once marched through with confidence now felt like a gauntlet. Passengers leaned slightly outward, eyes tracking her descent. Some whispered, others shook their heads, and one man murmured, "Karma always boards early." Alasia watched her shuffle past, her posture collapsing under the weight of consequences. She glared at him briefly, though the fire in her expression had dimmed to smoldering embarrassment. Her voice, once sharp enough to slice through metal, reduced to a muttered complaint drowned by the ambient noise. When she reached her row, the attendant waited until she buckled her seatbelt, then issued a final instruction. "You are required to remain seated for the rest of the flight unless escorted by crew." Lena sank back, defeated but still simmering, her fingers twisting anxiously around the strap of her handbag. The attendants resumed their duties, though traces of tension lingered in the air. The captain returned to the cockpit, and the cabin slowly exhaled. It felt as though a storm had passed, leaving behind a charged quietness and the relief of order restored. As the hours continued, Lena kept her gaze lowered, occasionally muttering under her breath but never rising again. Her earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a nervous rigidity. Several passengers whispered their gratitude to the crew, and one attendant discreetly thanked Alasia for stepping in when the confrontation risked escalating further. He simply nodded, offering a small, tired smile. When the announcement for descent crackled over the speakers, Lena stiffened visibly. Her eyes darted around the cabin, as though calculating escape routes. She seemed to hope the ordeal might vanish once the wheels touched the ground. But the flight attendants' exchanged glances said otherwise. Procedure was already in motion. The plane landed smoothly, rolling across the runway with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the earlier chaos. As soon as the seatbelt sign extinguished, several passengers stood, but the attendants stepped forward and held up their hands. "Remain seated, please. We have a security matter to handle before general deplaning." Lena's face drained to color. She clutched her handbag as though fearing someone might tear it away. When two airport security officers appeared at the front of the cabin, her breath hitched. They approached with professional neutrality, stopping beside her row. The lead officer spoke with quiet authority. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." Lena pressed herself into her seat. "This is unnecessary. I didn't do anything wrong. They're exaggerating. They're all against me." Her voice trembled, stripped of the confidence she once wielded like a weapon. The officer maintained composure. "You interfered with crew duties and attempted to breach a restricted cabin. We have statements and recordings confirming this. Please stand." Passengers watched with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. The woman who had disrupted their flight was now cornered by her own decisions. Eventually, Lena rose shakily, her bravado extinguished. As she walked up the aisle between the officers, her steps were slow, each one laden with dread. At the front of the plane, she paused and glanced back, her eyes searching for someone, anyone, to validate her story. But no sympathetic looks awaited her. She faced only the firm resolve of the officers and the reality of consequences. They guided her off the aircraft, disappearing into the jet bridge. The cabin released a collective breath. Passengers gathered their belongings, speaking in relieved tones. Several offered quiet words of thanks to the attendants. The tension that had gripped the cabin dissolved into the mundane rustling of bags and unbuckling of belts. Alejo retrieved his suitcase from the overhead bin and made his way toward the exit. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, he caught sight of Lena in the distance, surrounded by officers and airline staff, her posture wilted, her earlier superiority shattered. She looked nothing like the woman who had tried to force her way into business class. At baggage claim, a few passengers approached Alejo to thank him again. A flight attendant passed by and offered him a sincere smile. "Your calmness helped more than you know," she said before heading off to her crew. He nodded, lifting his suitcase handle. The weight of a long day pressed on him, but there was relief too, a sense that justice had unfolded naturally. As he stepped toward the exit doors, he couldn't help but reflect on the strange unpredictability of travel, how a single moment could reveal so much about strangers. Outside, the air was cool and welcoming. He inhaled deeply, feeling the tension slip away. And though the ordeal was over, the memory lingered like a quiet reminder that dignity mattered, especially when tested at 30,000 feet. He walked onward, grateful for calm skies and clearer minds ahead. As Alejo stepped outside into the cool air beyond the terminal doors, he felt the last traces of tension slip off his shoulders. The chaos, the shouting, the confrontation, it all faded into the distant hum of airport traffic. Somewhere behind him, Lena would be filling out reports, answering questions, and facing the consequences she had worked so hard to create for herself. Justice had arrived exactly as it needed to, publicly, unmistakably, and without compromise. With a quiet exhale, Alejo rolled his suitcase toward the parking shuttle, grateful for peace and the strange reminder that dignity always traveled better than entitlement. If you enjoyed this story and want more real-life drama, satisfying karma, and high-stakes encounters at 30,000 feet, make sure you hit that like button, drop a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe for the next episode. Your support keeps these stories flying.